I stood on that stage, my hands trembling as I held the microphone staring out at 300 of the city's most powerful people in their glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. The crystal chandeliers above us cast dancing shadows across the ballroom, but all I could see was my Aunt Victoria's face draining of color as the first bank transaction appeared on the massive screen behind me. $50,000. Then another, each one a thread in the web of lies she'd spun to destroy me. When the final piece of evidence flashed across that screen, a recorded phone call between my cousin Tristan and the man who'd sabotaged our construction site, causing 12 workers to be hospitalized, I watched my aunt lunge toward me with a scream that would haunt me for months. Security guards caught her midway, her Chanel heels scraping against the marble floor, her perfectly coiffed hair falling across her twisted face as she shrieked words I'd never repeat. That was the moment I knew I'd won. But if you'd told 11-year-old me shivering in that freezing apartment while my mother took her last breaths that I'd one day publicly destroy the very family that took me in, I would have called you insane. Before we dive deeper into how I went from that terrified little girl to the woman who brought down an empire, do me a favor. If you're hooked on this story and want to see how far I had to fall before I could rise, hit that like button. Subscribe because trust me, what comes next is going to blow your mind. And drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation because honestly, there were so many moments I almost gave up. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. The rain was punishing that night, hammering against the windows of our crumbling 2-bedroom apartment, like it was trying to break through. I was 11 years old, kneeling beside my mother's bed, with a cold washcloth in my hand, trying to bring down her fever. She'd been sick for months, getting weaker every day, but we couldn't afford a doctor. Not after my father had cleaned out our savings account 3 weeks earlier. Mom's breath came in shallow gasps, her skin pale and clammy, and I kept telling her it would be okay, even though I didn't believe it myself. That's when I heard the front door slam open. My father stumbled into the bedroom, and I could smell the whiskey before I even saw him. Leo Sterling had once been handsome, or so my mother told me, but years of failure and alcohol had carved deep lines into his face. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt stained, and there was a wildness to him that made me instinctively step between him and my mother's bed. He didn't even look at me. His gaze went straight to the small metal box on the dresser, the one where Mom kept what little money we had left. $473. I knew because I'd counted it that morning, trying to figure out if it was enough for medicine. Mom tried to sit up, her voice weak but firm. Leo, no, that's for Arya, for food and rent. He actually laughed, and the sound was ugly. Food and rent. You think that matters now? I've got an opportunity, Elena. A real one this time. Jimmy's got a connection. We can triple this money in a week. His hands were shaking as he reached for the box. It's always an opportunity with you, Mom said, and I heard the years of disappointment in her voice. It's always one more chance, one more scheme. When are you going to take care of your family? That's when his face changed. The drunken desperation twisted into something meaner. Take care of my family. Maybe if your father hadn't cut me off, maybe if Arthur Blackwood hadn't looked at me like I was dirt under his shoe, we wouldn't be in this mess. He's got millions, Elena. Millions sitting in that mansion while his own daughter and granddaughter are starving in this hellhole. He cut you off because you stole from him, Mom said quietly. Because you forged his signature and tried to access his accounts. He gave you chances, Leo. So many chances. I watched my father's hand close around the metal box. Mom tried to stand, tried to stop him, but she was too weak. She took 2 steps and collapsed, her knees hitting the floor hard. I screamed and rushed to her side, but Leo was already backing toward the door, the box clutched to his chest. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and tossed it onto the bed. His eyes met mine for just a second, and I saw something there that might have been guilt, or maybe just more self-pity. Arya, he said, his voice thick. You'll be okay, baby. Daddy just needs to do this one thing. I'll come back when I'm successful, I promise. You'll see. I'm going to make something of myself. The door slammed. I held my mother as she sobbed, her body so frail I was afraid she'd break. 4 days later, she was gone. Pneumonia, the free clinic doctor said, complicated by malnutrition and stress. They let me stay with a neighbor for the funeral, which was just me, Mrs. Chen, from across the hall, and a priest who didn't know my mother's name. I was signing papers I didn't understand, being told I'd go into foster care when a car pulled up outside the funeral home. It was a Bentley black and gleaming like a predator. I'd never seen a car like that in our neighborhood. The driver opened the back door and a man stepped out. Arthur Blackwood was 72 years old, tall and straight-backed despite his age, wearing a suit that probably cost more than our apartment's yearly rent. His hair was silver swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and cold assessment. He looked at the funeral home, at me standing on the steps in my too small dress, and his expression didn't change at all. He walked up to me and everyone else seemed to step back instinctively. "Arya Sterling," he said, not a question, a statement. "You're Elena's daughter. You have my eyes." I didn't know what to say. I'd heard about my grandfather my whole life, always in whispers and anger. The rich old man who'd disowned my mother when she married my father. The one who'd refused to help us no matter how much Mom begged. I wanted to hate him, but I was also terrified and alone, and some desperate part of me wanted him to care. "Your mother's gone," he continued, his voice flat and businesslike. "Your father abandoned you. You're 11 years old with no money, no home, and no prospects. Foster care will chew you up and spit you out. But you're a Blackwood whether I like it or not. You're blood. So here's what's going to happen. You're coming with me. Your old life is over. Everything that happened in this neighborhood, all of that ends today. Understood?" I should have said no, I should have run, but I was a child. I was scared, and he was offering me something other than the unknown horror of the system. So I nodded. He turned and walked back to the car without another word, expecting me to follow. I grabbed the small bag of my things that Mrs. Chen had packed and climbed into the back seat. The leather was soft and smelled expensive. Arthur didn't speak to me during the 40-minute drive to his estate. He made phone calls discussing stock prices and business deals like I wasn't even there. When we pulled through the gates of the Blackwood estate, I felt like I'd entered another world. The mansion was enormous, all white stone and tall windows, surrounded by manicured gardens that seemed to stretch forever. But as we pulled up to the front entrance, I saw them waiting. A woman and 2 teenagers, all wearing expressions that made my blood run cold. Victoria Blackwood. My aunt was a sharp-featured woman in her mid-40s with blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She wore pearls and a cream-colored dress, and when she looked at me, her lip actually curled. Standing on either side of her were her children, my cousins. Tristan was 16, already tall, like his grandfather, with the same cold blue eyes. Isabel was his twin, beautiful in that cruel way that some teenage girls perfect, her arms crossed over her designer sweater. Arthur got out of the car and I followed, clutching my pathetic little bag. Victoria didn't even wait for pleasantries. "Father," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "What is this? Why are you bringing Daniel's trash into our home?" I flinched at the word trash, but Arthur didn't react. "This is Arya. She's family. She lives here now." Tristan laughed, a sharp bark of sound. "You can't be serious. Look at her shoes." I glanced down at my worn sneakers, the ones with the hole in the toe that I'd been hiding with a marker. "She looks like she's been dumpster diving." Isabel leaned toward her brother, not quite whispering. "Well, her mother was always a disaster. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? Give it a few months and she'll probably steal something and disappear just like her dad." Something inside me wanted to scream at them to defend my mother, but Arthur's hand landed on my shoulder like a vice. "Inside," he commanded. "All of you." The mansion's interior was even more intimidating than the outside. Marble floors, paintings that looked centuries-old, furniture that was probably worth more than my entire apartment building. Arthur led me to a bedroom on the 3rd floor that was bigger than the whole place I'd grown up in. It had its own bathroom, a massive bed with a canopy and windows overlooking the gardens. "This is yours," Arthur said. "Dinner is at 7. Don't be late." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing, Arya. I don't believe in coddling. You want to survive in this family, you'll need to be strong. Tears are useless. Weakness gets you destroyed. Your mother learned that the hard way when she chose that pathetic man over her own family. Don't make the same mistakes she did." He left me there, and I sank onto the bed, numb. I didn't cry, even though I wanted to. Something about the way he'd said it, the casual cruelty mixed with that grain of truth, made me swallow the tears. That night at dinner, I sat at an enormous table, silent, while Victoria and her children talked about people and places I'd never heard of. Nobody addressed me directly. I might as well have been invisible. The next morning, Arthur knocked on my door at 6 a.m. When I opened it, still in pajamas, Mrs. Chen had packed. He handed me a stack of books. Introduction to Business Management. Fundamentals of Financial Markets. Strategic Thinking for Leaders. The top book in the stack was thick enough to be a weapon. "You'll read these," he said. We'll discuss them over breakfast tomorrow. If you can't keep up, there's no point in you being here. The Blackwood name means something, and I won't have it dragged down by ignorance. For the next 3 years, my life became a brutal education. Arthur was never warm, never grandfatherly in any traditional sense. He didn't ask me about school or friends or how I was feeling. Instead, he drilled me on market theory, negotiation tactics, and corporate structure. He brought me to his study every evening and presented me with problems, business scenarios that didn't have easy answers, ethical dilemmas where every choice had consequences. He'd sit back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, and watch me think through solutions. When I got something wrong, he didn't yell. He just dissected my logic with surgical precision, showing me exactly where my thinking had failed. When I got something right, there was no praise, just a slight nod and a harder problem the next time. He taught me to control my expressions, to never let anyone see what I was really thinking. He taught me that emotion was a weakness others would exploit, that trust was a luxury the powerful couldn't afford, and that in the end, only results mattered. Victoria and her children never let up. Tristan would bump into me in hallways, knocking my books everywhere, then apologize with exaggerated courtesy while Isabel laughed. They'd make sure I overheard their conversations about parties I wasn't invited to. Boys who'd never look at someone like me futures that were bright, because they came from the right kind of family. Victoria was subtler, but more poisonous. She'd comment on my clothes at dinner, wondering aloud why Arthur was wasting money on me when I'd probably end up pregnant and poor like my mother. She'd sigh about how difficult it was to maintain the family's reputation when there were such unfortunate connections. But something was happening to me. The scared little girl who'd clutched a washcloth beside her dying mother was hardening into something else. Arthur's training was brutal, but it was also effective. I stopped flinching at insults. I learned to smile blandly when Tristan mocked me. I discovered that the best revenge wasn't anger, but competence. When I was 14, everything shifted during one dinner. Arthur had been discussing a problem Blackwood Enterprises was facing. A manufacturing partner in Asia was demanding a contract renegotiation that would cost the company millions, but walking away would shut down their entire supply chain for months. Victoria suggested paying the increase and passing costs to customers. Tristan proposed finding a new partner, even if it meant short-term losses. Isabel barely paid attention, more interested in her phone. Arthur looked at me. "And you, Aria, what would you do?" I'd been studying the situation for 3 days, ever since he'd mentioned it. I'd read through old contracts, researched alternative suppliers, and mapped out the financial implications of every option. "We renegotiate," I said, keeping my voice steady, but not from a position of weakness. "We approach 3 other potential manufacturers, publicly make sure our current partner knows we're doing it. At the same time, we offer them a longer contract, 5 years instead of 2, but only if they accept terms that are actually favorable to us. They'll see the stability as worth more than squeezing us short term, and we'll have leverage because they'll know we have alternatives ready." The table went quiet. Victoria's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Tristan stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. Arthur leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, I saw something that might have been approval flicker across his face. It wasn't warm. It was the look a craftsman gives a tool that finally performed as expected. "Interesting," he said. "We'll discuss implementation tomorrow." Victoria's voice cut through the moment sharp as glass. She got lucky, probably overheard something and is parroting it back. But Arthur's gaze shifted to his daughter, and there was something in it that made even Victoria go quiet. From that night on, the dynamic changed. My aunt and cousins no longer looked at me with simple contempt. Now there was calculation, wariness, and something that looked a lot like fear. They'd started to see me as competition, and they were right to. The years passed. I graduated high school with honors, taking college courses on the side that Arthur selected. I was 17 when he started bringing me to board meetings, making me sit in the corner and observe. By 18, I was reviewing contracts and sitting in on major negotiations. I learned the language of power, the subtle ways deals were really made the difference between what people said and what they meant. Arthur never told me I was doing well, but he gave me more responsibility, which I understood was his version of pride. Victoria and her children's resentment grew proportionally. At 19, I overheard Tristan on the phone telling someone that the old man had clearly lost his mind, that he was elevating the bastard granddaughter over his legitimate heirs. Isabel started spreading rumors at the country club, suggesting I was manipulating Arthur, that maybe the relationship was inappropriate. Victoria was more strategic. She began positioning herself with board members, taking them to lunch, building alliances. I saw it happening, but Arthur told me to let her play her games. Let them think they're clever, he said. Underestimated opponents make fatal mistakes. Then on a Tuesday morning in March, Arthur Blackwood died. He was 79 years old, and it was a massive heart attack in his study. I found him slumped over his desk papers, scattered his reading glasses on the floor. The paramedics said he'd been gone for at least an hour. I stood there in that study, surrounded by all those books we'd discussed, all those problems we'd solved, and I felt something crack inside me that I'd been holding together for 8 years. He wasn't a good man. He was cold and calculating, and he'd used me as much as he'd helped me. But he'd also been the only person since my mother who'd seen something in me worth developing. The funeral was enormous. Business leaders, politicians, society figures, all coming to pay respects to a titan of industry. I stood between Victoria and her children during the service, and I could feel the anticipation radiating off them. They thought they'd won. They thought with Arthur gone, I'd be out back to nothing, and they'd finally have what they believed was rightfully theirs. The reading of the will was scheduled for 3 days after the funeral. Arthur's longtime attorney, Richard Chen, no relation to my old neighbor, gathered us in the mansion's library. Victoria sat in the center chair like it was a throne, Tristan and Isabel on either side of her. I took a seat near the back, my hands folded in my lap, my face carefully neutral, the way Arthur had taught me. Richard opened the document and began reading. Victoria received the villa in Monaco, a place she'd always loved, along with $5 million. Tristan received a $10 million trust fund that would pay out over time contingent on him maintaining employment and staying out of legal trouble. Isabel received the same. There were various other bequests, charitable donations, provisions for staff. Victoria was practically glowing. 10 million each for her children, a villa for her, and they all assumed the company, the real empire, would be divided among them. Then Richard cleared his throat. To my granddaughter, Aria Elena Sterling, I leave controlling interest in Blackwood Enterprises consisting of 51% of all shares, along with the primary estate and all properties not otherwise designated. Furthermore, I name her Chief Executive Officer and Chairman of the Board with full authority over all business operations. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched Victoria's face go from confusion to shock, to a rage so pure it was almost beautiful. Tristan shot to his feet, his chair scraping back loudly. That's impossible. He couldn't have. She's nobody. She's not even a real Blackwood. I assure you, Richard said calmly, the will is ironclad. It was revised 6 months ago and witnessed by 3 attorneys. Isabel's voice was shrill. This is insane. Daddy, please tell me you knew about this. But Victoria couldn't speak. She was staring at me like she wanted to watch me burn. When she finally found her voice, it came out as a hiss. You did this. You manipulated him. You poisoned his mind against his own family. You're just like your father, a scheming little parasite who latched onto something better and sucked it dry. I stood up slowly, meeting her eyes. Arthur's training held. My voice was level, my expression unmoved. I never asked him for anything. Everything I have I earned. Maybe that's a concept that's foreign to you. Tristan moved toward me, and for a second I thought he might actually try to hit me, but Richard stepped between us. I suggest everyone take time to process this. Ms. Sterling, we should schedule a meeting to discuss the transition of responsibilities. Everyone else, please contact my office if you wish to contest the will, though I should advise that Mr. Blackwood was very thorough in his preparations. I left the library with as much dignity as I could manage, but once I reached my room, I had to sit down because my legs were shaking. 51% of Blackwood Enterprises. That was billions of dollars in assets. Factories, real estate investment portfolios, international holdings. It was more money than I could conceptualize, more power than I'd ever imagined having. And it was terrifying because I knew Victoria would never accept this. Arthur had given me a kingdom, but he'd also painted a target on my back. The first board meeting as CEO was scheduled for 2 weeks later. I prepared obsessively, reviewing every division's performance, memorizing names and positions, studying the company's strategic plan for the next 5 years. I wore a black suit that Arthur's tailor had made for me, my hair pulled back, minimal jewelry. I wanted to look like I belonged in that boardroom. When I walked in, the energy was immediately hostile. Victoria was already seated, and she'd positioned herself at the opposite end of the conference table, her own power position. The board members were mostly men in their 50s and 60s, executives who'd worked with Arthur for decades. I could see the skepticism on their faces. Some of them had probably changed my diapers, metaphorically speaking. Now I was supposed to lead them. I took my seat at the head of the table, the chair that had been Arthur's. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know this transition is unexpected. I want to assure you that I take this responsibility seriously, and I'm committed to continuing the legacy my grandfather built." That's when Victoria struck. "Before we proceed," she said, her voice honey-sweet poison, "I believe we need to address the elephant in the room. Arya is 21 years old, with virtually no real-world business experience. She's been tutored by my father, yes, but running a multi-billion-dollar enterprise requires more than theoretical knowledge. It requires proven leadership, established relationships, and frankly, maturity that comes with age." Several board members nodded. I saw where this was going, but I let her continue. "Therefore," Victoria pulled out a folder, "I'm formally proposing a vote of no confidence in Miss Sterling as CEO. I'm not doing this out of spite, but out of genuine concern for this company's future. I propose that the board appoint an interim CEO with actual experience, while Arya takes a developmental role where she can learn and grow. In time, perhaps she'll be ready for this position, but not today." She looked around the table with practiced concern, and I saw several board members shifting in their seats considering it. Then Marcus Vance spoke up. He was Arthur's former right-hand man, someone I'd worked directly with on several projects. I thought he was on my side. "I hate to say it," Marcus said, and he did look genuinely uncomfortable, "but Victoria has a point. Arya is brilliant, we all know that. Arthur wouldn't have chosen her otherwise, but throwing her into the deep end like this could hurt her and the company. Maybe a transitional period makes sense." I felt something cold settle in my chest. This was a coup. Victoria had spent the last 2 weeks lining up votes convincing board members that I was too young, too inexperienced, too risky. She'd probably promised them stability, continuity, and generous compensation packages. "That's an interesting proposal," I said, keeping my voice calm, even though my heart was racing. "May I ask who you'd suggest as this interim CEO?" Victoria smiled. "I think Marcus would be ideal. He knows the company inside and out, has Arthur's trust, and can provide steady leadership." I looked at Marcus, who couldn't quite meet my eyes. The betrayal stung more than I'd expected. Then I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small USB drive. "Before we vote on that, I'd like to share something my grandfather left for me. He recorded it 3 months before he died." I plugged the drive into the conference room's display system. Arthur's face appeared on the screen, sitting in his study, looking directly at the camera with those sharp eyes. "If you're watching this," his recorded voice filled the room, "it means I'm gone, and someone is trying to remove Arya from her position. I expected this. Victoria, Marcus, whoever else has joined this little conspiracy. Let me make something clear. I chose Arya not despite her youth, but because of it. She's not contaminated by the old ways of thinking, not trapped in the comfortable corruption that's been slowly rotting this company. More importantly, I trust her in a way I've never trusted any of you." Victoria's face was turning red. The board members looked uncomfortable. Arthur continued. "So I took precautions. I amended the company charter 6 months ago. Any attempt to remove the CEO within 5 years of my death requires a 75% shareholder vote. Arya controls 51%. Do the math. Unless she agrees to step down voluntarily, which I assure you she won't, she's untouchable. You can try to work with her, or you can leave. Those are your options. To Arya, if you're watching this, don't let them intimidate you. You're ready. Trust yourself the way I trusted you." The video ended. The silence in that boardroom was deafening. I looked at Victoria, whose hands were gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. Then I looked at Marcus, who was staring at his notepad like it held the secrets of the universe. "So," I said quietly, "shall we move on to the quarterly reports? Or does anyone else want to waste time trying to undermine me?" Nobody spoke. The meeting continued, and I led it, making decisions, asking questions, demonstrating that Arthur's faith in me wasn't misplaced. But I knew this wasn't over. I'd humiliated Victoria publicly, destroyed her coup before it even started. She would retaliate. The only question was how. The answer came 2 months later. Blackwood Enterprises had broken ground on a major mixed-use development downtown, a project worth $300 million that would house retail offices and luxury apartments. It was supposed to be our flagship urban renewal initiative. I was on site one morning wearing a hard hat and reviewing plans with the construction foreman when I heard the screaming. A crane operator had lost control of a load of steel beams. They'd come crashing down onto a partially constructed floor where 12 workers were installing framework. The sound was horrific, metal on metal concrete, cracking, men shouting. Emergency services arrived within minutes, but the damage was done. 3 workers had critical injuries. 9 others were hurt badly enough to be hospitalized. Miraculously, nobody died, but it was close. The investigation started immediately. OSHA city inspectors, our own internal team, and the media descended like vultures. 24-hour news coverage showing the twisted metal, interviewing crying family members, questioning how a company like Blackwood could let this happen. My face was on every news channel, every website, always with the same questions. Was I too inexperienced to handle this responsibility? Had Arthur made a mistake? Was I going to resign? I spent 72 hours straight at the hospital, meeting with families, ensuring every medical bill was covered, that every worker had legal representation if they wanted it. I was exhausted, emotionally shredded when Ben Carter found me in a hospital cafeteria at 2 a.m. Ben was 26, head of our cybersecurity division, brilliant and quiet. He'd always been respectful to me, never joined the whisper campaigns. He sat down across from me with his laptop. "You need to see this," he said. On his screen were financial records. Money transfers from an offshore account registered to a shell corporation. The money had gone to the crane operator 3 days before the accident. Not a huge amount, $50,000, but enough. There were also encrypted messages that Ben had managed to crack. Instructions to make it look like equipment failure, and timing is critical. "Where did this come from?" I asked, my exhaustion vanishing. "I've been monitoring unusual financial activity since your grandfather died," Ben admitted. Call it paranoia, but something felt off. I traced this back through 3 different corporate shells. The money originated from an account controlled by Tristan Blackwood. My cousin had paid someone to cause an accident that nearly killed 12 people, to destroy my reputation, to get me removed from the company. I looked at Ben, and he must have seen something in my face because he leaned back slightly. "What do you want to do?" "Keep digging," I said. "This can't be the only thing. If Tristan is this dirty, there's more. And I want to know if Victoria and Isabel are involved." Over the next 3 months, Ben and I worked in secret. He pulled financial records, traced money flows, recovered deleted emails. I used my position to access areas of the company Victoria thought were safely hidden. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. Victoria had been embezzling from company accounts for years, small amounts at first, then larger as she got confident. She'd set up fake vendors-approved invoices for services never rendered, and split the money with several board members, including Marcus Vance. Tristan had his own schemes, using company resources for personal projects, taking bribes from contractors. Isabel was cleaner, but still complicit, helping launder money through her various boutique investments. They'd been robbing Arthur's company for years, and he'd either not known or had been too sick to stop it in his final months. The total was nearly $30 million. That's when I realized what I had to do. Arthur hadn't just given me a company. He'd given me the tools to expose and destroy those who'd betrayed him, and I was going to use every single one. The Blackwood Enterprises annual charity gala was the social event of the season. 500 guests, every media outlet in the city. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders, all gathered at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel ballroom. It was black tie champagne flowing, and orchestra playing the whole spectacle. Victoria and her children attended like victors, having spent months rebuilding their social reputation. They thought they'd weathered the storm. They thought I'd been sufficiently weakened by the construction accident scandal. They thought wrong. I'd arranged for the evening's program to include a presentation about our charitable initiatives, normal fundraising stuff. I took the stage in a midnight blue gown, smiled at the crowd, thanked them for coming. Then I changed course. "Before we discuss this year's donations," I said, "I need to address something that's been weighing on me. This company was built on integrity by my grandfather. He believed that with great wealth came great responsibility, so I think he'd want me to be transparent about something I've discovered." The first image appeared on the massive screens flanking the stage. A bank transfer. Victoria's personal account receiving a $100,000 payment from a fake vendor. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The next image. Another transfer, then another. Email chains appeared showing Victoria authorizing fraudulent invoices. Then came the construction site evidence. Tristan's payments to the crane operator. text messages discussing the incident and how it would finally get rid of her. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Cameras flashed like lightning. I kept going methodical, showing every piece of evidence Ben and I had compiled. The shell corporations, the bribed board members, the pattern of theft going back 8 years. Finally, I played a recording Ben had obtained a phone conversation between Victoria and Marcus Vance, discussing how once I was removed, they could finally run this company the way it should be run and take what we deserve. Victoria stood up from her table, her face a mask of fury. She started pushing through the crowd toward the stage, and I could hear her screaming my name, calling me things I won't repeat. Tristan tried to grab her arm, pull her back, but she shoved him away. Security moved to intercept her, but I held up my hand. I wanted everyone to see this. She made it to the base of the stage, pointing up at me with a shaking finger. "You ungrateful bitch," she spit out. "My father took you in. He gave you everything. And this is how you repay us, by lying, by fabricating evidence, by trying to destroy your own family." I looked down at her and I felt nothing but cold clarity. "You destroyed yourselves. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." That's when the police arrived. I'd notified them an hour before the gala started, given them copies of everything. Detective Sarah Morrison walked through the crowd with 4 officers, and you could have heard a pin drop. "Victoria Blackwood," she said. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Tristan Blackwood, you're under arrest for bribery, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit assault." They read them their rights while cameras captured every second. Tristan tried to run, actually bolted for a side exit, but officers were waiting there too, the handcuffs glinting under the chandeliers. Isabella was crying, her perfect makeup streaming down her face, but she wasn't charged. She'd cooperated with investigators in exchange for immunity, smart enough to see which way the wind was blowing. Marcus Vance and 2 other board members were arrested in their homes simultaneously. The media frenzy lasted for weeks. Every news outlet covered the Blackwood scandal. The footage of Victoria being arrested at the gala went viral, analyzed and memed, and discussed endlessly. Our stock price initially plummeted, but I'd prepared for that. I went on camera, did interviews, explained exactly what had happened and what I was doing to fix it. I fired every corrupt executive, restructured the board with people who actually had integrity, and implemented new oversight systems. Within 3 months, the stock had recovered and then exceeded its previous high. Investors liked the new transparency. Customers liked that we'd held ourselves accountable. But the public victory didn't erase the private cost. I destroyed what little family I had left. Victoria and Tristan both got 5-year prison sentences. Marcus got 3. The money was recovered, but the relationships were gone forever. I'd lie if I said it didn't hurt. Despite everything they'd done to me, they were still my family, and I'd been the one to put them in prison. I threw myself into work. I restructured Blackwood Enterprises, pivoting towards sustainable development and ethical manufacturing. I hired young people hungry and talented, who didn't care about my age or my history. The company thrived, but I was lonely in a way I'd never been, even when I was that 11-year-old girl in the crumbling apartment. Then 6 months after the trial, I received a letter. It came to my office, handwritten, the envelope worn like it had traveled a long way. I recognized the handwriting instantly, even though I hadn't seen it in over a decade. My father, Leo Sterling. I almost threw it away without opening it. But curiosity, or maybe some lingering piece of that little girl who'd watched him leave, made me tear it open. The letter was short, written in a shaky hand. He was dying. Lung cancer stage 4 in a veterans hospital 3 states away. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness, not really. He just wanted me to know he was sorry. That he thought about that night every day. That he knew he'd failed me and my mother in every way a man could fail his family. He said he'd watched my success from afar, read every article, and that he was proud, even though he had no right to be. He said he hoped I'd found a better life than the one he'd left me with. I sat in my office for an hour just holding that letter. Arthur's voice echoed in my head, telling me that weakness gets you destroyed, that sentiment is a luxury. But another voice, my mother's, whispered that compassion isn't weakness. I didn't go see him. I couldn't. The wounds were too deep, and some betrayals don't earn reconciliation. But I did arrange for his medical bills to be paid, for him to have a private room and good care. I did that not for him, but for my mother, who'd loved him despite everything. And maybe a little bit for that 11-year-old girl who'd wanted her daddy to come back. He died 2 weeks later. I didn't attend the funeral, if there even was one. But I took his letter and put it in a wooden box in my office next to Arthur's pocket watch and a photo of my mother. Pieces of a past I couldn't change but could learn from. Then I did something that would have shocked the Blackwoods. I took the $30 million that Victoria and the others had stolen the money we'd recovered, and I created the Sterling Blackwood Foundation. We focused on helping kids in situations like mine, kids with parents who'd failed them, kids in poverty, kids who needed someone to believe in them. We provided scholarships, mentoring, job training, housing assistance. I hired social workers and counselors. I bought the building where that construction accident had happened and turned it into our headquarters, a kind of poetic justice. 1 year after the gala, I stood in that building's community center, watching 20 kids receive scholarships. They were all ages, all backgrounds, but they all had that same hunger in their eyes that I'd had. The hunger to prove themselves, to escape their circumstances, to become something more. A little girl, maybe 10 years old, came up to me after the ceremony. She had a gap-toothed smile and wore a dress that was clearly secondhand, but carefully mended. "Miss Sterling," she said, suddenly shy. "My mom says you used to be like us, poor and sad, but you made it. Is that true?" I knelt down so we were eye level. "That's true. It wasn't easy, and there were times I wanted to give up, but I had people who helped me even if they weren't always nice about it. And I decided that the bad things that happened to me didn't get to define who I became." She nodded seriously, processing this. "I'm gonna do that too. I'm gonna be someone important." "I believe you," I said, and I meant it. That night, I stood on the terrace of the Blackwood estate, looking out over the city lights. The mansion felt different now. Less like a prison, more like just a house. Victoria's villa had been sold. Tristan and Isabel's trust funds had been redirected to the foundation. The rooms where I'd been mocked and belittled had been renovated into offices for the company's new green technology division. I'd taken something built on coldness and calculation and tried to make it mean something better. My phone buzzed. Ben, now my chief technology officer, sending me projections for our new solar panel manufacturing plant. It would create 1,500 jobs in a struggling town and position us as leaders in renewable energy. Arthur would have approved of the business case, but I like to think my mother would have approved of the purpose. I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I wasn't even the ruthless executive Arthur had tried to mold me into. I was something in between, shaped by trauma, but not broken by it, hard enough to survive in a cutthroat world, but soft enough to remember why that world needed changing. I'd taken the ashes of my childhood, the cruelty of the Blackwoods, and the cold lessons of Arthur, and I'd forged something new, not perfect. I still had nightmares sometimes. I still struggled with trust, but I'd proven that you don't have to let your worst moments define you. You can take the pain, acknowledge it, learn from it, and use it to build something better. 11-year-old Arya, shivering in that apartment while her mother died, would never have believed this was possible. But she'd survived, and in surviving, she'd learned to live. The rain started again, gentle this time, not punishing. I stayed on the terrace, letting it cool my face, and I thought about that crumpled note my father had thrown on the bed. "Arya, you'll be okay." At the time, it had been a lie, an excuse for abandonment. But somehow, against all odds, it had become true. Not because of him, and not even really because of Arthur. Because I'd decided it would be. And that decision, that choice to keep fighting, even when everything seemed lost, made all the difference. So here's my question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where family or someone you trusted made you feel worthless? Where you had to choose between staying comfortable in a toxic situation or risking everything to save yourself? What would you have done in my place? Would you have exposed them the way I did? Or would you have chosen a different path? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious how you'd handle having the power to destroy the people who hurt you. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe, because trust me, you don't want to miss what I share next. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are with the people who were supposed to love us, but winning those battles, standing up for yourself, when everyone says you should just accept your place, that's where you find out who you really are. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember, you're not defined by what others do to you. You're defined by what you choose to do next.